Welcome to Life Stories, where real-life experiences take us on unexpected journeys. Today, we bring you a gripping tale of courage, trust, and the fight against control. When a teacher's instincts tell her something is terribly wrong, she embarks on a mission to uncover the truth behind a child's disappearance. With the lives of a mother and daughter at stake, every decision becomes a battle against time. Join us as we dive into this powerful story, filled with twists, emotions, and life-changing lessons. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to begin today's story. The evening was settling over Maplewood Preschool, as the last laughter of the children began to fade into the quiet of the building. It was a routine I had grown accustomed to over the years. The sound of shoes scuffing the polished floor, the murmurs of parents exchanging pleasantries, the quick goodbyes as children were handed off to their families. It was a peaceful moment, the calm after the chaos of the day. But something felt off that day. I couldn't quite place it at first. But as I stood behind the front desk, making sure all the children were signed out by their parents, I noticed a small detail that set my senses on edge. The clock read 5:27 p.m. Most of the children had already been picked up. A few stragglers remained, but my attention was drawn to one child in particular. Emily Thompson, Emmy, as her mother called her, sat alone at the far end of the classroom, absorbed in her drawing. The others had long since rushed to their parents, eager to leave for the day. But Emmy remained hunched over her craft table, her small hands gripping a blue crayon so tightly it looked as if she might break it. I approached her, lowering myself to her level. "Sweetheart, your mom should be here soon," I said gently, trying to bring her attention back to the present. She didn't look up. She just continued coloring, her movements slow and deliberate, as though every stroke of the crayon had to be perfect. A 5-year-old shouldn't be so controlled, so meticulous. I watched her closely, noticing the tension in her small shoulders, the way her jaw clenched as she focused on the task at hand. It wasn't just the kind of distraction I often saw in children who didn't want to leave, it was something more. I reached out to offer her a new crayon when the one in her hand snapped in half under the pressure. "It's okay, that happens sometimes," I said softly, placing the new crayon in front of her. Emmy didn't react. Her grip on the crayon holder tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might not let go. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something. But nothing came out. Her breath became quick and shallow, as if something was weighing heavily on her. I could see that something was wrong. I had spent years working with children, and I knew when they were hiding something, when they were afraid. "You all right, honey?" I asked, my voice gentle but firm. She finally glanced up, her big brown eyes flicking nervously to the entrance of the classroom before darting back down to the table. Her tiny head shook, just the slightest movement, but it was enough to send a cold shiver down my spine. "Did something happen at school today?" I pressed gently, feeling the weight of the moment. She hesitated. I could see her thinking, her little chest rising and falling too quickly. And then, in the smallest voice, she whispered, "I don't want to go home." Those words, soft as they were, struck me deeply. When a child says something like that, it's never just about not wanting to leave school. It meant something more. My heart tightened in my chest, and I felt an unfamiliar knot form in my stomach. Before I could ask any more questions, the front door of the classroom opened, and a man stepped inside. My attention snapped to him immediately. He was tall, sharply dressed in a tailored gray suit, and exuded an air of quiet authority. His polished shoes gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and his dark hair was neatly styled. He was not the kind of parent who would have the frazzled, tired look of someone who had been at work all day. He seemed out of place, too composed for a routine pickup. "I'm here to pick up Emily," he said smoothly, his voice calm and professional. I paused, instinct kicking in. "And you are?" I asked, my tone steady but questioning. "A family friend," he replied, offering a polite, thin smile. His eyes never left mine, as if he was evaluating me, assessing how I would respond. I felt a flicker of unease. I glanced at the pickup log on my tablet. His name wasn't there. Emily's mother didn't mention anything about a change in the pickup arrangements. I said carefully, trying to remain composed. The man sighed, as if mildly inconvenienced. She was supposed to. She must have forgotten, he said smoothly, as if the matter was of no consequence. My gut tightened. I'll need to confirm with her first, I said firmly, not backing down. He nodded, but there was something unsettling about him, something too controlled. Most parents would be flustered by a misunderstanding like this. But he seemed completely unbothered. I turned back to Emmy. But she had gone completely still. She wasn't the usual kind of stillness a child might display when they were uncertain or shy. This was different. She looked rigid, unnaturally so. Sweetheart, do you know this man? I asked, my voice gentle but filled with urgency. Emmy didn't answer. Instead, her grip on the crayon holder tightened further, and her breath came in quick, shallow bursts. She was visibly shaking. The man knelt beside her, whispering something in her ear. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw her stiffen. And then, like flipping a switch, her expression went blank. She stood up, placed her crayon carefully on the table, and took the man's hand without a word. I felt a cold wave of dread wash over me. My heart raced, and every instinct I had screamed that something was wrong. I knew it. I had to do something. But what? What proof did I have? How could I stop them when everything on the surface appeared fine? But deep down, I felt a gut-wrenching certainty that Emmy wasn't leaving with him willingly. Hold on, I said, standing quickly. I need to call Sarah first. The man merely sighed and pulled out his phone, swiping through the screen before showing me a text. It was from Sarah Thompson's number. But the message was abrupt. It didn't sound like Sarah at all. Let him take Emily. It's fine, the message read, and the words, so perfectly constructed, made my stomach churn. I stared at the phone, feeling the dread grow in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't right. Something was off. But what could I do? The man pocketed his phone and gave me an expectant look, as if to say everything was fine. But I knew it wasn't. I had to make a choice. Should I stop them, or let them go? I didn't know what was the right thing to do. But every part of me told me to trust my instincts, even if I had no proof. They walked out the door, and I watched them go, the knot in my chest growing tighter with each passing second. I stood there, frozen in place, as the black SUV pulled away from the curb. Emmy was in the back, her small face turned toward the window. She wasn't crying. She wasn't waving goodbye. She was just still. The car merged onto the road and disappeared beyond the tree line. I exhaled sharply, my heart pounding in my chest as the finality of my decision hit me. I had let them leave, despite every fiber of my being telling me that something was terribly wrong. I glanced at the clock again. 5:37 p.m. The building seemed eerily quiet now, as though it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The usual noise of children running around had faded, and now it was just me and my thoughts. A gnawing feeling of unease continued to twist in my stomach. What if I had made a mistake? What if I was wrong? I stood behind the front desk, trying to keep my composure. But the seconds felt like hours. I had made a gut decision, one that seemed so clear in the moment. But now the doubt was creeping in. I tried calling Sarah again, but her phone went straight to voicemail. I tried texting her, hoping for a reply, but nothing came through. Her silence was deafening. A few minutes passed, and I stared at the screen of my tablet, watching the names of the children as they were signed out. There was no record of Emmy leaving. I ran my fingers across the screen, double-checking the log. There should have been a confirmation when Emmy left. Her name should have been signed out by the person picking her up. But nothing. The digital log was untouched. And that unsettled me even more. It was as if someone had erased her departure. A cold chill ran through me. Could it be possible that the man had manipulated the system somehow? I didn't have enough evidence, but I knew I had to act fast. I pulled up the school security footage, praying to see something, anything, that would help explain the situation. My eyes scanned the video, but it was just a blur of children, parents, and teachers coming and going. Nothing out of the ordinary. But then, as I watched closer, I saw it. The man had approached the door with such purpose. His movements too calm, too rehearsed. It felt like he knew exactly what he was doing. And Emmy's reaction, her unnatural obedience. The way she went from rigid to compliant in an instant was beyond troubling. I replayed the moment when he whispered in her ear. The change in her was instant. One moment, she was stiff, afraid, and the next, she was following him without a single protest. I could feel my pulse quicken as I remembered her voice earlier that day. "I don't want to go home." The words echoed in my mind. Had I ignored a cry for help? Was she trying to tell me something? The door to the office opened, and Mrs. Calloway, the principal, stepped inside. She gave me a tired smile, but I could see the weariness in her eyes. It had been a long day for all of us. "Everything okay, Linda?" she asked, sensing the tension in the air. I hesitated, looking at the tablet in front of me. "There's something wrong," I said, my voice tight. "Emily Thompson, she left with someone who wasn't on the approved list. And there's no record of her pickup." Mrs. Calloway's brow furrowed as she sat down beside me. "A family friend?" she suggested. But I shook my head, the suspicion growing in my chest. "That's what he said, but it doesn't feel right. The message from Sarah, it didn't sound like her. And Emmy, I trailed off, not wanting to voice what I feared the most. Mrs. Calloway sighed and leaned back in her chair. "Linda, you've been doing this a long time. Parents sometimes forget to update pickup arrangements. It happens all the time. Maybe she's just busy." But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than a misunderstanding. Something had changed. There was a reason Emmy had reacted that way. And I wasn't going to ignore it. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I need to call Sarah again. Something's wrong. Mrs. Calloway, I can't just let this go." Mrs. Calloway gave me a skeptical look. But she didn't stop me. She didn't understand. She couldn't. The thing is, when you've worked with children for as long as I have, you learn to read between the lines. And right then, I knew Emmy was in trouble. I grabbed my phone and dialed Sarah's number again. This time, the phone rang longer before it went to voicemail. I pressed the button to leave a message. But my words were shaky. Unsure. "Sarah, it's Linda. I just want to confirm that everything's okay with Emmy's pickup. Please call me back as soon as you can. I'm a little concerned." As I hung up, I felt the weight of the moment settle over me. The car had already left. And Emmy was gone. I had to trust that I had done the right thing. But deep down, I couldn't shake the sense that something wasn't right. The next few hours were a blur. I tried to carry on with my day. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I kept checking my phone, waiting for a message from Sarah. But nothing came through. I walked the familiar halls of the preschool, the laughter of the children echoing in my ears. But it all felt distant, as if I were outside of myself, observing everything from a great distance. By the time the sun had fully set, my nerves were on edge. The feeling that I had made a grave mistake kept gnawing at me. What if I had let something dangerous happen? What if Emmy needed help, and I hadn't acted fast enough? The next day, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I couldn't just sit idly by, hoping that everything was fine. I needed to know where Emmy was, who this man was, and what was happening. I pulled up the school security logs once more, determined to find something, anything, that would explain what had happened. And there it was, staring back at me. In the records, the entry for Emmy's pickup had been updated manually. There was no signature from the man who had taken her, and no verification from Sarah. The log had been altered, and that told me everything I needed to know. Someone had erased the paper trail, and Emmy had been taken without any proper confirmation. My heart sank as the pieces started to fall into place. I couldn't believe it. Had Sarah been involved in this? Was she somehow complicit in letting Emmy be taken? I didn't want to believe that. But the evidence was starting to suggest something more sinister was going on. I grabbed my coat and headed for the door, my mind racing with the possibilities. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. I drove straight to Sarah's apartment, hoping to find some clue, some sign of what was happening. As I pulled up to the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a trap. But I had to know. I had to do this for Emmy. I pressed the buzzer for Sarah's apartment, but there was no answer. I knocked harder, the sound echoing down the hallway. Still nothing. My heart was pounding in my chest as I glanced at the door handle. It was unlocked. Without thinking, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The apartment was eerily quiet. The kind of silence that felt unnatural. It was neat. Too neat. Like someone had gone to great lengths to make it look untouched. But there were small signs that something wasn't right. The coffee cup on the counter, half full and cold. The mail stacked neatly on the table. The slight disarray in the living room. It all felt wrong. I walked through the apartment, each step slower than the last. I needed to find something. Anything. That would help me understand what was going on. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, and I couldn't resist the urge to peek inside. What I saw made my stomach churn. There was no sign of Sarah, but there were signs of a struggle. A piece of furniture had been moved, and the closet door was slightly open, as if someone had been in a hurry to leave. But where had Sarah gone? I felt a growing sense of dread. This wasn't just a missing persons case. This was something far darker. Sarah had been trying to leave. She had been trying to escape from something. And now, it seemed, she had disappeared into thin air. I grabbed my phone and dialed the number for Detective Aaron Coyle, who had been handling the case. Detective Coyle, it's Linda Harris. Something's happened. Sarah's gone. I'm at her apartment, and there are signs of a struggle. He picked up on the first ring. Stay where you are, Linda. I'm sending officers over. As I waited for the police to arrive, my mind was racing. Everything was starting to make sense. But the more I uncovered, the more questions I had. Who had taken Sarah? Why was she trying to leave? And what did this man, Greg Thompson, have to do with it all? The answers were becoming clearer, but they only led to more frightening possibilities. I was beginning to realize just how deep the situation went. And as the minutes ticked by, I knew that I wasn't going to be able to ignore what was happening any longer. I had to find Emmy, and I had to find Sarah. But the truth was, I had no idea where to start. The police arrived at Sarah's apartment shortly after I made the call. Detective Coyle was with them, his sharp eyes scanning the scene as he took in the small details that I had missed. The officers fanned out, checking the apartment thoroughly, but there was no sign of Sarah. The place was clean, almost too clean, as though she had been trying to cover her tracks before vanishing. Where's Sarah, Linda? Detective Coyle asked, his voice steady but filled with urgency. What do you know about her husband? I swallowed hard. I didn't want to say it out loud, but I had to. Her husband, Greg Thompson. I think he's involved. I think he's behind this. I found a strange text message from Sarah's phone, and it didn't sound like her at all. I think he's manipulating the situation. Coyle's eyes narrowed at the mention of Greg's name. Greg Thompson, he muttered, as if he had heard the name before. We'll need to look into him more. I nodded, trying to keep my composure. The walls were closing in on me. The more I uncovered, the more it seemed like I was swimming in a sea of uncertainty. But one thing was clear. Greg was controlling everything. And if I didn't do something soon, I feared it would be too late. We spent the next several hours trying to piece together clues. The officers checked surveillance footage from around the neighborhood, hoping to spot anything that might lead us to Sarah's whereabouts. But there was nothing. No signs of her leaving the apartment. No strange vehicles parked outside. Nothing. It was as if she had just disappeared. I couldn't sit still. Every minute felt like an eternity. I paced back and forth, my thoughts racing. Where could she be? Was she in danger? And where was Emmy? What had happened to her after she left the preschool with that man? I knew I had to act quickly, but I didn't know where to start. Then, a breakthrough. Coyle returned with information he had gathered about Greg Thompson. He had a history of controlling behavior, a pattern of emotional manipulation, and a recent divorce filing that had been buried under layers of legal paperwork. It seemed that Sarah had been trying to get away from him for months. And now, it all made sense. Greg had been planning something far worse than I had imagined. He knew she was leaving, Coyle said, his voice grim, and he wasn't going to let that happen. It hit me like a ton of bricks. Greg had been pulling the strings all along. He had orchestrated everything, the pickup, the disappearance of the records, the manipulation of Sarah's phone messages. He was determined to keep Emmy, to keep Sarah under his control. and he had already started erasing Sarah's existence from the picture. But I wasn't going to let him get away with it. The next step was obvious. I needed to find Emmy. And I needed to find Sarah. The trail was cold, but I had a gut feeling that they were close, too close for me to just sit idly by. I grabbed my keys, not waiting for Coyle or anyone else to tell me what to do. This was my fight now. I couldn't back down. I drove to Greg's estate, my heart pounding in my chest as I pulled into the long driveway. The gates were tall and intimidating, but I wasn't going to let that stop me. I knew I had to go in. I had no backup, no plan, but I had to see it for myself. I parked near the gate, trying to stay out of sight. The property was enormous, hidden behind trees that seemed to tower over everything else. I noticed the security booth just inside the gate. A uniformed man standing guard. My stomach dropped. I rolled down the window, trying to keep my voice calm and steady. Good afternoon. I'm Linda Harris. I'm here to check on Emily Thompson. Her mother hasn't been in touch. And I'm concerned. The guard studied me for a moment, as if weighing whether I was important enough to bother Greg with. Then, before he could speak, a voice called from beyond the gate. Let her in. The gate slowly opened, and there he was, Greg Thompson. His broad shoulders filled the doorway as he stepped onto the driveway. Wearing a crisp navy suit, he exuded control, too much control. My gut twisted. I stepped out of the car, trying to keep my composure. I just wanted to make sure Emmy's okay, I said, my voice steady but my insides a mess. Greg's smile was thin and calculated. She's exactly where she belongs. Linda, she's happy here. His words were meant to sound reassuring. But I didn't believe him for a second. A maid appeared, leading Emmy by the hand. Emmy's expression was unreadable, and my heart sank. This wasn't the little girl I had seen yesterday. The one who had been afraid. This Emmy was different. She was quiet, subdued. She didn't run to me. She didn't even react when I called her name. Sweetheart, how are you? I asked, lowering myself to her level. Emmy's gaze flickered to Greg before returning to me. I love it here, Miss Harris, she said, her voice soft but forced. It was the same unnatural obedience I had seen in the kindergarten. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about custody. This was about control. Greg stood nearby, watching me carefully, as if waiting for my reaction. I forced a smile, though every instinct screamed at me to grab Emmy and run. She seems happy, I said, my voice steady, though my hands were shaking. I'm glad she's adjusting well. Greg's smile didn't reach his eyes. Children thrive with stability, and Emmy's getting the stability she needs here. I nodded, but I wasn't fooled. I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And as I turned to leave, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't done yet. I was going to fight for Emmy. And I was going to fight for Sarah. No matter what it took. As the days went by, the investigation into Greg Thompson's manipulation and control deepened. With the help of Detective Coyle and the police, we managed to track down more evidence that exposed his twisted plans. The more we uncovered, the more it became clear that he had been orchestrating everything for years. But he didn't expect the strength of those who were determined to protect Emmy and Sarah. One fateful evening, as the police raided Greg's estate, I sat anxiously, hoping they would find Emmy and Sarah. The tension was unbearable, but I knew this was it, the moment that would change everything. When the call came through, I felt my heart leap. They had found them. Sarah and Emmy were safe. Greg, the man who had thought he could control everyone in his life, was now behind bars, and his empire of fear had crumbled. It wasn't just a victory for Sarah and Emmy, it was a victory for everyone who had ever felt trapped by manipulation, fear, or control. But even after Greg's arrest, the road to recovery for Sarah and Emmy would be long. Still, they were free, and that was what mattered most. They could start fresh, begin healing, and rebuild their lives, no longer haunted by the shadows of the past. As for me, I would never forget the lessons I learned through this experience. Trust your instincts. Never underestimate the power of empathy. And always fight for what's right. Thank you for following this story. If you enjoyed it, Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more life stories that inspire and remind us of the strength we all have within.